President Buhari condemns undue politicization of the nation's security situation.
UK envoy assures of enhanced existing ties with Nigeria despite Brexit debates.
Nigeria to pursue reforms for improved revenue collection and expenditure.
And on Good Morning Nigeria today, we shall examine the new Nigerian Correctional Service looking beyond the name change.
Correctional services are meant to provide rehabilitation for those who have broken the law towards readmitting them to society upon completion of their jail sentences. However, the extent to which this is true in practice in Nigeria has always been a subject of controversy in various debates.
And Kingsley, in some of these debates, they have highlighted the need for reforms in Nigerian prison service, particularly in the wake of criticism for their overcrowded state and poor conditions. As at 2nd September 2019, correctional services all over Nigeria have a total of 73,102 inmates in custody, with 50,216 still awaiting trial.
Well, certainly, this is why concerned stakeholders have repeatedly protested against the state of Nigerian prisons, and that rather than being out of the prisons a reformed person, many offenders who are sent to the prisons usually come out hardened and subsequently become repeat offenders.
And one of the arguments is that it has become almost impossible to reform prisoners to be better than they were before imprisonment, when poor prison conditions make it almost impossible to equip them with new skills or even improve on the old ones. And despite the achievements of the Nigerian Prison Service, its mandate from the Prison Act of 1972 was more centered on punishment rather than behavioral orientation.
Well, of course, stakeholders, again, in the Nigerian criminal justice administration system have been applauding the signing into law of the 11-year-old Nigerian Correctional Service Bill. Of course, it was signed into law by President Muhammadu Buhari. An expectation, of course, stakeholders expect that the new act will live up to its name and deliver on its mandate of reforming and rehabilitating errant members of society who are sent there for correction.
And in a direct response to the long-standing overcrowded prisons issue, the law in its section 12 sub 8 empowers the state of the controller of correctional service to reject intake of additional inmates where the facility under his watch is filled to capacity. In light of this, what happens to rejected prisoners? Where will the inmates be taken to? Will such an inmate be released, particularly where he or she is actually alleged to have committed very heinous crimes?
Well, Rhoda, these are some of the issues that people talk about with regard to congestion in prisons, and the Nigerian Correctional Service Law has also made a strong case for the use of non-custodial sentencing for minor offenders, which means that the court can order the payment of a fine or give a restrictive order as a sentence to a person who's been found guilty instead of sending them to already overcrowded jailhouses.
So how realistic is this particular provision of the Correctional Service Law, though? Are more prisons going to be built to accommodate all of its provisions, particularly as almost all the correctional service centers in the country have already overshot their normal capacities?
Well, the new act also accommodates the provision of separate facilities, as it were, for female inmates in every state. This is against the old practice of having a wing carved out for women in a general facility. But one question that arises is, where will the funding for these new facilities come from.
And I'm sure many Nigerians are hoping that as the signing of the Correctional Service Act repeals the Prison Act and changes the name from Nigeria Prison Service to Nigerian Correctional Service, there may be something more beyond the name. We'll find out in the course of our discussion this morning.
It's on that note, we'd like to welcome you to this edition of Good Morning Nigeria. It's the 11th day of September. It's our pleasure to have you on the program. My name is Kingsley Osadola. As always, we are live on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority.
And I'm Rhoda Anonam. I join Kingsley welcoming you to today's edition of the program. As always, we shall bring to you our complimentary segments of the program, and that would include the newspaper review. We have business, sports, foreign, entertainment news. But as always, the news comes first, and Comfort Amadu is set to deliver the news this morning. Comfort, good morning. It's good to see you.
Good morning, Rhoda and Kingsley. Good morning, Nigerians. And here's the morning news. Remnants of the Boko Haram insurgents in the northeastern region of the country are bandits and will be treated as such by the federal government. President Muhammadu Buhari stated this while receiving an audience the visiting president of the International Committee of the Red Cross, Peter Mora.
Very much impressed and satisfied by the positive response of President Buhari, by the appreciation for what the Red Cross does here in Nigeria, and also to feel his strong support for the mandate and work that the International Red Cross as a neutral and impartial humanitarian organization does.
Meanwhile, President Muhammadu Buhari has described as unfortunate, disturbing and counterproductive politicization of the nation's security situation. This was while exchanging views with a group of promoters of the proposed African Security Leadership Summit. Terrorism, militancy and electoral violence are among major security challenges confronting most African countries. The need to curb these threats that have the tendency of retarding socioeconomic development in Nigeria necessitated the summit jointly organized by the Nigerian Army and New Partnership for Africans Development, NEPAD.
Emanating from terrorism, insurgency and electoral violence negate the desire of African Union Agenda 2063, which expects Africa to be a continent where democratic values, gender equality, justice, and rule of law are institutionalized.
The incidents, responses, and initiatives of various agencies involved in tackling the challenges require understanding by all stakeholders for the country to move forward.
Vice President Yemi Osinbajo has described as fulfilling and promising the National Livestock Transformation Plan for the attainment of sustainable peace and development. This is when the Vice President was flagging off the plan in Yola, Adamawa State.
The introduction of the National Livestock Transformation Plan is a win-win for the state and its people. The plan will provide a basis for peaceful coexistence and jobs for many, and a mechanism for resolving disputes of various kinds.
The United Kingdom has restated that the debate on Brexit will not take a toll on relations with Nigeria, but will rather enhance existing ties. British Deputy High Commissioner to Nigeria, Gil Atkinson, said this during a meeting with a secretary to the government of the Federation, Boss Mustafa, in Abuja.
Of Brexit is the UK looking globally and the UK looking beyond Europe for our friends. So for Nigeria, you are a friend that we have had for a long time and an important friend. So I see Brexit as something which will strengthen our relationship.
The 61st meeting of the United Nations World Tourism Organization's Commission for Africa, hosted by Nigeria in July 2018, got a resounding applause from member countries attending the 23rd General Assembly, which is underway in Russia.
Most of African colleagues attended the commission meeting. So that shows that we within ourselves, we go and travel to different countries and very supportive. So Abuja was a successful meeting, and the declaration today I have narrated here, the 10 points were all discussed in Abuja. So that declaration in Abuja was very crucial for the roadmap for Africa 2030.
Our hosting of our CAF in 2018 went a long way in debunking the fake news about Nigeria. It redefined what Nigeria really was.
Nigeria will vigorously pursue reforms like the Strategic Revenue Growth Initiative to improve revenue collection and expenditure. Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning Zainab Ahmed at the Public Consultative Forum on the 2020-2022 Medium-Term Expenditure Framework and Fiscal Strategy paper said government will this month begin deduction of 614 billion naira bailout funds to states.
It's now expected to design how they will achieve the targets that have been set for them. But there's one cross-cutting requirement that for each project that you make a case you want to implement, you must also show how much jobs is going to be created.
That's the news for now. Good Morning Nigeria continues shortly with Kinsley and Rhoda after the break.
Candidates who applied for Ahmadu Bello University and NTA TV College degree program in mass communication for 2019-2020 academic session that the post-UTME screening exercise has been scheduled to take place on Saturday, 21st September 2019. Venue, NTA TV College premises, Rayfield, Jos. Time, 9 a.m. Screening fee, 2,000 naira paid through the remitter platform in favor of NTA TV College Jos. Candidates who chose the college as second and third choices in the 2019 UTME examination scored 180 and above and willing to study at the college can also come for the exercise. Candidates who satisfy the above requirements are expected to come along with the originals of their O-level certificate, any of WAEC, NECO, or NABTEP, JAMB slip, birth certificate, indigenship certificate, and proof of payment. Direct entry candidates are expected to come along with their original diploma certificate, A-level results in addition to other credentials mentioned above. Registrar, Announcer.
There's a smarter way to live with Airtel Binge Plan, the ideal data plan for those heavy data moments. Get a 2 GB daily binge plan for 500 naira. Dial *141# to activate. Live smarter with data.
Airtel, the smartphone network.
To the outer framers, the hat tippers, the fringe growers, you don't need to hide anymore. Try Dettol Even Tone. It cleans and helps to reduce the appearance of blemishes caused by oil, dirt, and germs, giving your skin a healthy feel for an even better you.
Introducing the new Dettol Even Tone Pink Glow. Healthy skin feel for an even better you.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Please, did you hear that?
Of course I did. That is Village Elmaster tune.
Eh? So, Auntie Amebo was not gossiping then?
Village Elmaster is celebrating 50 years.
50? Already? This is not a joke. Oh.
It is a national celebration. NTA and Village Elmaster family are commemorating 50 years.
Hey, please, tell me, when is our Golden Jubilee?
It is from the 8th to 11th of October 2019.
The chairman.
Out of those 44 trillion with the rest, the banking sector has stepped up and has put a lien on those accounts. So we certainly are not leaving any stone unturned.
Meanwhile, the Director General of the Budget Office of the Federation, Ben Akabweze, says federal government received 2 trillion naira as revenue from January to June 2019. He made the disclosure at the Public Consultative Forum on the 2020-2022 Medium-Term Expenditure Framework and Fiscal Strategy paper in Abuja. Within the period under review, the DG noted that about 3.3 trillion naira was expended by the federal government, with an average of 1.6 million barrel of crude oil production per day on basis production barrel per day, stating that an aggregate of 4 trillion naira revenue was collected in 2018 with expenditure of 7.4 trillion naira, including 1.7 trillion naira capital budget within the period.
The good news is that the daily the oil production is rising. Data from NNPC says they are currently doing 2.1 million barrels. So we hope that the second half of the year will deliver better revenue performance overall. Oil price has year to date, as of half year, been about $67 average, as against $60 that we had in the budget, the benchmark price.
And next is closing figures of trades on the floor of the Nigerian Stock Exchange.
Thank you very much, Comfort Amodu, for that business package. Up next for us is a review of some of today's newspapers.
Regular newspaper reviewer Bayo Atoyebe is here with us this morning. Bayo, good morning.
Thank you, Rhoda. Good morning. Good morning, Kinsley. Good morning, Nigeria.
Right, Bayo. Let's begin with the Daily Sun. Let's rise with the Daily Sun. All right. On the Daily Sun, just beside the nameplate, it says corruption responsible for hardship in Nigeria, says Buhari. ICPC recovers 900 billion naira from NAT members. That's on page 10. And of course, the lead story is a story that is trending on some of the dailies today. Judgment day for Buhari Atiku as tension as presidential election petitions tribunal delivers verdict today. APC PDP full of expectations. Judgment day for Buhari Atiku. It's the lead story for The Sun this morning, and it's on page 6. Of course, the picture photograph there is that of President Muhammadu Buhari and Atiku Abubakar. Below the picture story, bailout fund deduction states on verge of bankruptcy. That's on page 2. 320 Nigerians arrive from South Africa. And below there, you see Pretoria reopens High Commission and the Consulate. EFCC FBI recovers $169,885,000, 92 million naira in joint operations, says Magu. And finally, court okays for feature of Desiane's $40 million jury. And others. That's on page 4. Those are the stories on the front page of the Daily Sun.
Okay, let's go straight to the Punch newspaper, and the lead story is also on the decision being awaited today in the presidential election petition. Buhari versus Atiku, that's the kicker. Tribunal rules today, APC and PDP confident of victory. Details of that story can be found on page 21. And then above the nameplate of the paper, just 10 power plants idle and generation tumbles to 2,866 megawatts. That's on page 24. Government begins evacuation today and atmosphere tense in South Africa. That's on page 21. Matawale and others to meet Buhari over border closure. That's page 11. And federal government reduces 2020 budget size to 9.7 trillion naira. Cuts oil benchmark to $55 per barrel. It is on page 10. 2 earpieces beside the nameplate of the Punch will continue to pursue Leah Sharibu's release. That's attributed to the Red Cross. And EU okays 102 million naira for Sokoto and Zamfara malnourished children. Now, the photographs on the front page of the Punch newspaper, the photographs come with the headline, IMN, that is Islamic Movement in Nigeria, alleges 15 Shiites killed. Police say 64 arrested. Details on page 2. Bandits sack Niger communities, kidnap 6. Buhari's commander dies after 30 years of service. It was a personal staff of the president at his country home in Daura. That's on page 7 in greater detail. Protesting Benue pensioners vacate government house. Page 7. Yesterday we had read a report in which the pensioners indicated that they were ready to die at government house. But this one is now saying that they have vacated government house. Minimum wage, FG and Labour agree on fresh talks. Page 21. Abducted Ondo professor found dead in bush. Page 4. Soldier fighting Boko Haram arrested for Adamawa robbery. Page 8.
All right, bye. Well, let's start with the issue of the moment. The Presidential Petitions Tribunal served notice of hearing to councils yesterday, and consequently, the tribunal is to deliver judgment today. It may be recalled that the People's Democratic Party and its presidential candidate Atiku Abubakar challenged the victory of President Muhammadu Buhari in the February 23 presidential election. Already, election tribunals across the country have continued to deliver judgments. And this is because the subsisting time for such hearings to be heard were running out. It had 180 days, and the days are running out fast. And most across the state, some positions have been won, others have been lost, and some rerun have been ordered. Meanwhile, the Federal High Court in Lagos has eventually forfeited jewelry worth $40 million belonging to former Minister of Petroleum, Desiane Alison Madueke. Meanwhile, the police carried out its threat of stopping IMN from protesting yesterday. The IMN had threatened that they will come out with their normal procession on Ashura Day, and the police has said because of the terrorism prescription order on IMN, such procession were illegal. She had reported that some of their members were killed across some states, and they are listing that a total of about 15 have been killed. The police has denied that nobody has been killed, but 64 persons have been arrested for violating the procession order. 28 were arrested in Bauchi, 36 in Katsina, and in most cases, police say they dispersed the procession IMN members because their gathering was illegal. Meanwhile, expectation about our compatriots in South Africa, first batch of Nigerians who volunteered to return are expected to leave South Africa 9 o'clock this morning. The first batch of 320 Nigerians is reported, according to Punch, to say that they are expected to board Air Peace aircraft this morning. The president of the South African Union, he says, so far, the environment in South Africa is calm. However, foreign businesses have opened. However, the businesses belonging to those who are foreigners that were looted still remain short. Many of them have had to relocate from the precinct in Johannesburg to the central area to play safe. Air Peace has also said that its airlift of Nigerians who have volunteered to return is utterly free, and therefore persons who are demanding $1,000 each from every passenger have no grounds to do so. So nobody should pay any money to for the purposes of being airlifted to Nigeria. Meanwhile, the Minister for Finance, Budget and National Planning has indicated that all workers in ministries, departments and agencies of federal government who have not enrolled on integrated payroll and personal information services will not get their salary from October. This is because a deadline had been given that by Mr. President that everybody in the federal public service must register on the IPIS. And the Minister of Information, of Budget and National Planning says that with effect from October, nobody who has not complied with the IPIS will get the salary. Meanwhile, personal costs, including pension, of over 3 billion had continued to rise, and this is why they are serious about stemming the increase. He said that steps have been taken to contain the rise. Meanwhile, the Minister of Budget and National Planning says that the bailout, about 614 billion that was paid to 35 states, the ministry will commence deduction at the end of September. It says that from the Federation Account Allocation Committee meeting that will meet this September, the deductions will commence. But however, it did not indicate whether it will be deducted gradually or in one fell swoop. Meanwhile, the highlights of the medium-term expenditure framework and fiscal strategy for 2020 has been revealed. The minister said that national consumption is put at 122.75 trillion. The budget is trimmed down to about 9.7 trillion. Revenue is projected to be about 7.63 trillion. Oil projection, 2.18 million barrels per day, while the rate of selling crude will be $65. Gross domestic product is put at 142.96 trillion, while inflation is still on the downward slide, is put at 10.81%.
All right, Bayo. Let's talk about the match by IMN yesterday, because you've touched on almost most of the stories that are trending. They said they lost about 15 people. The police is saying no.
Well, the claim is that there are persons who participated in demonstrations in Bauchi, Gombe, Katsina, Sokoto, were shot at in some places, and they are listing persons that died. And according to them, 15 in all the places where the procession took place were killed. But the police is saying that nobody was killed. Yes, it is true they dispersed the protesters because by the prescription of the IMN, that procession was illegal. And they had given notice that they should not come out. And they too had dared that they will come out. And the police has to enforce the law.
The police also was clear that it wasn't all Shiites that were prohibited from embarking on the procession yesterday, but it was only members of the IMN, that is the Islamic movement in Nigeria. But returning to the other story of the planned evacuation of Nigerians from South Africa beginning today, I think that there should be additional information as to the port of arrival. It will be very interesting to see how they will be handled upon arrival. Because we have seen instances in the past, where state governments, particularly those who were coming in from Libya, state governments deployed their officers, to get persons who were from their state, then take them to a safe location and, of course, begin the social cycle rehabilitation from that point. It's not just sufficient to say, look, come back home. Some of them may have been away for a while, so you're going to have a challenge of re-entry, psychological challenge of re-entry and adjustment into the Nigerian society. So you land at the port of entry, what next?
Yes, if experiences of the recent past are anything to go by, persons that were evacuated from Libya, they were brought under the International Refugees Organization, and there were officers of National Emergency Services and also, I think, NATIP and a few other agencies that received them at the airport. The initial indication so far it has come from the chairman of the Diaspora Commission, and it says that when they come back, there's an attempt to register them with the government programs so that they can have something to do before they settle in. But usually, there's the normal process of getting immigrants into the country. They will be listed and also probably also examined for purposes of health, and they will work with the various state agencies to see whether they will locate them in the camp, as it has been done in some instances, or be dispersed to their various states as they may choose.
Okay.
All right, Kingsley, let's take the editorial for today. Daily Times, we have Daily Times, but it's leaving with all the same stories that we have on the Daily Sun. So let's take the editorial.
So New Telegraph is an editorial that we are taking on this morning, and it's at page 15, New Telegraph. Unbundling and Merger of Ministries. That's the title. Let's take the emphasis in the middle of the editorial. It says that it is evident that certain ministries deserve to be on their own because of their strategic nature, but we have continued to tinker and engage in trial and error. These inconsistencies and flip-flop do not in any way show us as a serious people.
Well, editorial has happened on the key ministries that were unbundled. Particularly, we will recall that we used to have the Ministry of Power, Works and Housing. Now we have power on its own, while work and housing are still together. There was also transportation and aviation. We now have transportation and aviation. And you also will recall that police affairs was extracted from the Ministry of Interior. The question the editorial is asking, what was the criteria for merging some of this? But that put aside, it is obvious that one of the biggest challenges we have for all our economic recovery program is power. And therefore, if power is isolated from Ministry of Power, Works and Housing, it is obvious that it is meant to address the strategic nature of power as far as the economic revival programs are concerned. Also, we have critical security problems. And so the isolation of the police away from the Ministry of Interior is to enable it get real attention that it deserves so that it can take care of internal challenges. However, we now have 3 statutory bodies that will pretend over police. You have the police council, the Police Service Commission, and now you have a Ministry of Police Affairs and the Police High Command Management. Already there are indications of conflict between Police Commission and the Police High Command about the recruitment of police. So we need to be very careful so that these bureaucracies do not become an obstacle in the course of providing services. But the intention is well taken because it will enhance and enable concentration of the ministers on the specific industries that are now isolated.
All right, thank you very much, Bayo, for your time and insight on our review this morning. We'll hope to see you again tomorrow morning.
Thank you.
You're watching Good Morning Nigeria. We'll take a short break now, and when we come back, our focus this morning is on the Nigerian Correctional Service beyond the name change. We'll be back in just a moment.
Digital studio equipment is a critical aspect of modern television that requires special skills for their operation and maintenance. These skills define the content and output of television and are acquired only through professional training and experience. NTA TV College JOS is organizing a special 4-week intensive course on digital studio equipment maintenance for engineers and technical officers in public and private television stations. The course will equip participants with modern techniques, technologies, and skills for effective and efficient operation and maintenance of digital studio equipment. Also, a special 4-week course on intermediate photojournalism and photography will run simultaneously. It is an essential course for photojournalists, photographers, public relations, and information officers to upscale their skills and capacities in photojournalism. Participants will be equipped with modern skills in photo editing, studio, and outdoor lighting, and more in just a few weeks. The venue for both courses is the serene and secure environment of NTA TV College near Old Government House, Rayfield, Jos. Date 16 September to 11th October 2019. Course fee 100,000 naira only per participant. Accommodation inclusive. For more inquiries, please call 0803-314-4383 or 0806-980-9807. NTA TV College Jos, training you to be the best you want to be.
Helen!
Hey, where's your mom?
Today is her toilet day.
What?
Helen!
Toilet day? Tomorrow you're hosting a party and it's a matter of my reputation. Even if you spend your entire day cleaning with all this, it still won't be party ready.
Impossible!
Challenge? New Ticker Harpic 10X. Even if you use this solution 10 times, it won't give you the same cleaning like Harpic. Its new Ticker formulation sticks to the bowl better, removes old stains, and gives you a sparkling clean toilet.
Wow!
New Harpic 10X gives me the freedom from toilet day. New Harpic 10X for 10 times better cleaning.
Mommy is ready to receive me a bundle of joy. Mommy is making my home cleaner and safer. We are Dettol Sure. Daddy is home. He must be germ-free. He needs to be Dettol Sure. My clothes are so nice. We are Dettol Sure.
Illnesses can happen at home too. That's why Dettol and me together will make my baby's home safe and to protect from up to 100 illness-causing germs. That's why moms want to be Dettol. Dettol Sure.
We are Dettol Sure.
They are there at the crack of dawn. They are there busy preparing while we rise for our day. They are there silently, guarding, waiting, listening, and watching. They are there ready in the sky above and the waters below, in the blistering heat of the day, in the dead of night, willing, indefatigable, determined in the defense of the sovereignty of our country. They are our first line of defense and our last. They who have paid the ultimate price in defending us. They are fathers and uncles. They are mothers and sisters and girlfriends and boyfriends. They are brothers and cousins and best friends and neighbors. They are classmates, colleagues, and citizens of this nation. They are our defenders and deserve our respect, our prayers, our thoughts. Nigeria, please support our armed forces.
This is Good Morning Nigeria, live on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority. Now, before we bring in our guests to discuss the new Nigerian Correctional Services this morning, let's see how Nigerians in general are reacting to the name change. We have this report put together by our correspondent, Oyemi Ajayi.
The prison should be a corrective measure. Maybe they will take them to a farm. Let them go and work in the farm. They'll be there till they serve their prison term. And there should be dispensation, speed or dispensation of judgment.
Because if you go to most of the prisons now, you find some people staying more than years expected. Some of them stayed 3, 4, 5 years. When coming out, they have nothing to do.
This new name now, it don't really sound to scared people. Because somebody like me, when I hear prison, I get scared somehow. You understand? So with that, I believe the way I get scared about prison, when I hear the name, I believe other people too be scared about the name of prison.
Well, I don't think there will be much difference from the old Nigerian prison service and the new idea that just came up. Well, it depends on the modality of carrying out the new system.
He's going to reform, especially the convicts. Going to reform or change some of them, their mentality. Like those that have been doing drug addiction. This means of this correctional food is going to change their mentality and will change them for good for the society.
In what way, sir?
In the way that it is going to be like a training them. Yes, training them and changing their mentality from what they have been outside.
So anybody that taking something like a small something like that, they're supposed to say, okay, give me a cane, either 6 cane, 6 lashes or something, or go and sweep this place. You understand me? And leave him, let him go. But some people, these big people, they are embezzling money.
Now joining us in the studio to discuss correctional service beyond name change is Jafaru Ahmed. He's the Controller General of the Correctional Service. Welcome to Good Morning Nigeria.
Thank you for having me. And good morning, Nigerians.
And also joining us from our Just Network Center, that's in Plateau State, is Professor Etanebi Alemika. He's a professor of criminology, University of Jos. Welcome to Good Morning Nigeria. Right, and in Port Harcourt, it's our pleasure to welcome Dr. Uju Agomo. She is the founder and executive director of Prisoners Rehabilitation and Welfare Action. Good morning, and it's good to have you join us in the program this morning.
Thank you very much. Good morning, Nigerians.
All right. Once again, we have three guests. Hopefully we'll be joined by another guest before the conversation is over. We're talking about the human rights perspective to all of this, beginning with the Controller General of what is now known as the Nigeria Correctional Service. Give us a sense of what the new law means to you, your men, and officers.
Well, thank you very much, and good morning, Nigerians. The Nigerian Prison Correctional Service, or Nigeria Prison Service as it was called then, had a law which was enacted in 1972. It was a military decree, which was found in Cap 29 Laws of the Federation 2004. In that law, there was nothing mentioned about reformation, rehabilitation, or reintegration. Only one item was mentioned as a function of the prison service, and that is legal custody of all those who are committed by courts of competent jurisdiction. So fundamentally, this law has been there for quite a very long time, for over 18 years that we have been battling. But we are very thankful to the 8th Assembly, and especially those members from the House of Reps, 4 members that sponsored the bills, and 3 senators that sponsored also the bills. It was these bills that were coalesced together to produce the Nigerian Correctional Service Bill, which has now been signed by Mr. President and Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces. In this law, there are clearly defined rules, functions that are assigned. Let me start. There is a function of the Controller General and the procedure for appointment of a Controller General. And there's also the qualification, who qualifies to be a Controller General. It's clearly defined in this law, which was not in the previous law. Secondly, the functions of the service, like I have rightly pointed out, there was nothing except legal custody. Now the issue of taking prisoners for legal custody, reformation, rehabilitation, assessing of risk assessment, taking underage and female inmates, and the rest of them are clearly defined to assign a specific function to the service. And there are also other issues. Mike, I have heard and I've seen people saying most of our prisons are overcrowded. Yes, they are, and most of the urban prisons are overcrowded. But this law addresses now the issue of overcrowding, in the sense that it aims to say that once a correctional center or a custodial center is about nearing full, the officer in charge of that custodial center should inform the relevant authorities. And this, in this case, the Chief Judge of the State, the Attorney General, the Commissioner of Police, and other relevant bodies, with the prerogative of mercy, to inform them that this custodial center is nearing full. And it gives them, the law gives them 3 months to take steps to ensure that this overcrowding is addressed before the issue of rejection comes in. There's also the issue of stigmatization of inmates. Once they come into prison, no matter what they have learned, no matter how they decide to settle, there's an issue. We do not issue certificate before. Now the law mandates us to issue certificate to those inmates, to tell them that they can do. And there is an issue of also inmates ration, which is now clearly defined within that law, to say this is what it is all about, that there must be provision of that. It has also said that the law provides for a different prison, a correctional custodial center for female inmates. And in that also, the law says we must also provide borsal training institutions, which means that we must have a borsal training institution in every state of the Federation. And it's also said we must provide a crèche for those female inmates that have babies in the prisons. These are some of the fundamental things. Then there is the manual work as assigned by the court, as determined by the court itself. There are also the issue of power.
Is the might it not have been more appropriate if it were Nigeria Correctional Services? considering the scope of functions indicated in the law itself: custodial, non-custodial, plus a breakdown of those other services.
Kingsley, you know there are times you talk about collective noun, in which case a word might be singular, but it's actually meant to be interpreted in a plural sense. It's like the word police. Police can mean an individual officer, and it can mean millions of officers engaged in policing duty. I think the service is meant to convey a plurality of services rendered by an organization. So once you begin to say services, it creates a problem of also listing what those services should be. But it's a service with, if you like, sub-services in that context. I don't think the name is a problem.
Thank you very much. We'll return to you later in the course of the conversation. Let's go over now to Dr. Uju Agomo, who is founder and executive director of Prawa, involved with prisoner rehabilitation and welfare. From your perspective, is the name change potentially a game changer?
I think very much so. And I believe that beyond the fact that with the name you have a focus which kind of emphasizes the importance of correction, of reform, of rehabilitation, of promoting reintegration, there are also some very critical things that we see in this new law. And you can see that all through. I mean, even if you start from the section 1, section 2, and beyond that. If you look at, for example, the objectives of the law itself, Professor Lemika had also alluded to the fact that this law makes it easier for us to comply with international human rights standards in terms of treatment of persons in prisons and within correctional services, but also to align with international best practices in terms of correctional practices. The second aspect is this notion of non-custodial measure, and I believe that this is one of the very important transformatory aspects of this new law. You and I know that it's not everyone that have offended that we need to have in a custodial facility. There are petty offenders, there are minor offenders, and some of these minor offenders, it's better to have them treated within the community because they are not high risk. So when you put them in custodial facilities, it's actually counterproductive because apart from the fact that the government will be spending more money in terms of feeding them, the other thing that happens is that they get contaminated more. I mean, by who are more hardened, and when they come out, it becomes worse off. The other third thing is this whole emphasis in terms of what now should rehabilitation mean, what now should be done in terms of risk and needs assessment that will enable the service do the needful in terms of rehabilitation. But one very powerful aspect is this point which was stated in section 2, and that is point D of the subsection D. And this is really making the service to be more proactive. Everybody knows that the issue of overcrowding is very critical. Everybody understands the fact that a high proportion of these people are awaiting trial. Now, the correctional services are personnel, are there day in, day out. They know when the problem is going to arise. They are seeing the population. They can, activate the early warning signals. So you can see a very progressive piece of legislation that we need to really begin to focus on. How do we ensure that it's effectively implemented? Because that is really the key thing. But if we implement everything that is in this new law, it is really a big thing for Nigeria to celebrate.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ojuagoma. We'll come back to you in the course of this discussion. Let's get back to the Controller General. A lot of issues have been raised. First of all, let's go to the issue of congestion of prisons. Very key. Statistics that we had rolled out during the course of the program says that about 72,000 thereabout are in custody. About 50,000 are awaiting trial. With this new piece of legislation, how do you intend to deal with all of that?
Well, this legislation deals with the issue of congestion in multiple ways. One, the issue of rejection of prisoners is very key to it. What it does is that people should see the rejection of prisoners not in terms of rejection what the court has said, but it forces other members of the criminal justice family to now sit down and assess their performance. As a key, get indicators and follow those indicators to ensure that the issue of overcrowding, because for God's sake, why should somebody be kept in prison for 9 years as an awaiting trial person and his case is not determined? And you go across the custodial centers across the country, you find so many people that are incarcerated 9, 10, 5, 6 years without any hope. So the issue of rejection addresses the issue of the criminal justice family to look into those issues and address them. Because in other way, the Nigerian Correctional Service has other prisons within the urban area that are not congested. I will cite you an example of Gusau Prison. It has a capacity of about 1,661, but you're just locking barely 800.
Why?
There are no prisoners. If it were to be the case that they were all convicted, we could have moved these people from the other states to that place. Take Port Harcourt. It has just a capacity of 804, but it's looking over 4,000. And out of these 4,000, 3,000, almost 700 are awaiting trial persons. It is a remaining population of about 300 or 400 that are convicted, and we cannot move them. So these are the issues that this law addresses. It forces the members of the criminal justice family to sit down and really address the issue of congestion, because we cannot, for God's sake, continue building prisons, expanding additional cells and the rest of them in order to address the issue of congestion. We need this law, this section of the law, to be enforced. But we will do it that with responsibility, so that certain prisoners, one received, will have to reduce the number, continue to reduce the number of convicts to other places, so that we give room. While we are looking internally, we also expect the other members to also do that responsibly.
All right, Controller General, I mean, why still on various aspects of the new act? Tell us something. Are you going to have to also change the names of your facilities? I mean, Kirikiri Maximum Security Prison. Is it going to become Kirikiri Maximum Correctional Center or Maximum Custodial Center?
No, Maximum Custodial Center, Medium Custodial Center, Satellite Custodial Center, Farm Centers. This is what the law says.
How did you
so we no longer have Kuje Prison, for instance?
We have, Kuje is already Kuje Medium Prison, but it's now going to become Kuje Medium Custodial Center.
All right, I'm sure that Nigerians in the course of time will get used to this. But still on this aspect of having a more efficient, criminal justice administration system in order to address the issue of congestion. Let's bring in Professor Etanebi Alemika. Professor Etanebi Alemika, on paper, I mean, that's to say with regard to the provisions of the new law, you can see the responsibility of every person in the value chain in the delivery of justice under the criminal legal system. But in your opinion, what is likely to work and what is likely to be the impediment, considering that usually all things certainly can never be equal?
You are right. The law is very, very good. It's important, but I can see quite a lot of challenges in the implementation. And I think we must start with the idea that this is not something we are buying off the shelf and will be there tomorrow to use. So we need a strategic plan of how soon we want to transform Nigerian prison into correctional service in reality. And I think that assessment needs to be taken. Take, for example, what do you do with almost 70% of awaiting trial? That is not for the prison. Prison is the last backstage of the criminal justice system. Police is the gatekeeping stage. So what we do at the level of our law in terms of how to treat offender in each provisions of the law, that means where you have a crime defined, the punishment you defined under that law is very important because it will determine how police will respond when there is a violation. So we must also look at our laws in terms of the kind of punishment that they have prescribed. The second thing that we need to do is, why are there so many people in prison awaiting trial? It says something about the capability and performance of those agencies along the process, starting from the police that makes the arrest to the prosecutor to the trial court judge. These are the three critical stages that we need to emphasize in terms of what goes on in the prison, because in some sense they are just recipients, and I think that's why the provision giving them some power to say we are not going to take more than we already have is very important as a way of putting pressure on all these stages to perform. So we need to understand for each of the stages, why is it often difficult to conclude the investigation even before arrest by the police? Because that's where the problem starts. You arrest where you have not even commenced investigation, and then you put the person there while you are investigating. While that is on, you have another problem. You forgot, the person is forgotten in prison. The new problem becomes the priority. So we must also standard rules to reach that, meeting the provisions of the law. I can see that if we're serious, the transformation might take about 5 to 10 years before we see actually fundamental change in the way things are today and the place we expect them to be.
Well, Professor Alemeka, thank you very much. I mean, you've already thrown in the caveat that, look, real change might not occur until perhaps half a decade to a full decade, considering the fact that the old law under which the Nigerian Prison Service had been operating was made 103 years ago, 1916. And then, of course, you had the amendment by the decree in 1972. Professor Alemeka, thank you very much. We'll return to you again to drill down into some of the provisions in the new Correctional Service Act. But let's put the same question to Dr. Uju Agomo. Dr. Uju Agomo, looking from the perspective of awaiting trial persons who usually have been the most population in our prison facilities, what, in your opinion, is likely to work in terms of getting the new law into effect? I mean, they say, look, a prison superintendent or a correctional facility superintendent should notify the appropriate authorities, prerogative of Mercy Committee, Attorney General of the state, the Chief Judge. But are we sure of the timelines for these other authorities to respond to the superintendent? In the meantime, law enforcement agents are busy raiding suspects, and then the courts are also processing them, to send them into the cooler in the meantime. What is likely to work and what is likely to create challenges?
Thank you very much for the question. I think first I must say that a journey of 1,000 miles starts with one step. Now, what I foresee will happen, and this is actually what I also hope should happen, is that once the early warning signal is triggered by virtue of Section 12, subsection 4, by the Correctional Service, to the agencies and platforms that actually have this role. And if you look at those that are listed, these are people who have an influence power in terms of determining the inflow of persons into custody and the outflow of these persons, because those are the two critical things you need to control the population: the inflow and the outflow, which means the inflow and, of course, the duration of time the person spends. So, for example, the chief judge, for example, can give a directive to courts to say, this particular prison is actually getting filled. Please ensure that any further detention, as much as possible, should be moved to other prisons within the states. The chief judge can decide to go into that particular prison with the other members of the judiciary to do a jail delivery and review all cases that are stored. He could look at certain things that he needed to do, including granting conditional releases to certain persons, because they know that at the moment they are working on an emergency to free up the states. Look at, for example, also the fact about the non-custodial that is provided. The chief judge can also say, because of the critical state that we are, please ensure that every petty offender, minor offenders that do not have any risk attached to them, should not be sent to custody. So you free up that space. And then the second element is that you look at the Attorney General. The Attorney General can begin to look at those cases that are before them, seeking the DPP's advice. You could look at things such as the ones that he needed to enter nolle. I mean, to say, I'm no longer going to continue to prosecute in this matter. More so, let us not forget the prerogative of mercy committees, because the prerogative of the mercy committees can actually go in and review the cases, including cases that they know that they can actually ask to please, pardon and ask them to leave, depending on the conditions and all that. So it's to help many people begin to do things. The other point I want to mention is that part of the things that were looked at during the process of working on this bill is that even the National Assembly asked for a cost implication in terms of the bill. We looked at, and I want to also use this platform to commend the Controller General of the Correctional Service, because part of what he was vigorously doing during that process of consultation was, what are the things that are early, low-hanging fruit? What are the things that can help Nigerians save costs? And one of the things was that at the moment there are welfare officers in the service. At the moment there are some psychologists. They may not be enough, but you know that with just a circular, a directive from the Controller General, he can now say to all the states, please designate your welfare officers or relevant officers or second them to a particular, these non-custodial facilities, which means that once the initial capacity building is happening, and I will tell you, as of last week, all the welfare officers and psychologists in Abia Correctional Service have been trained on implementation of non-custodial measures, along with the officers from the court that the court have designated by virtue of the Administration of Criminal Justice Law of Abia State 2017. We're also hoping that in FCT, some of that could happen. And then you begin to do certain activities to at least ensure that at the very minimum, certain things will happen. One final thing I want to flag here is to remind us about Rwanda. We remember that in Rwanda, they had, after the genocide, at least 150,000 persons, serious offenders in their custody, which they have issues dealing with. But they knew they could not accommodate that. What did they do? They introduced the gachacha process and said, listen, if you admit that you have committed these offenses, and provided you are not a ring leader, we can fast track you through the gachacha process, and that instead of keeping you in custody, we will send you to what they call TIGI, T-I-G-I, which is the community service. And by doing that, that population was brought down from 150,000 to about 59,000. So my point here is that our focus is that we must make sure that we need to have steps to fast track the review of those who are currently awaiting trial in these places. If we have the team go in, do the pre-sentencing report, do the initial assessment, and find out those we can be safely applied to non-custodial measure and divide them out of that place. You don't take environmental offenders and plug them up in custody. So there are so many critical things we can begin to do, at least at a time now, whilst we phase out, because this thing will not happen overnight. I completely agree with Prof. But we need to start now. And I believe that if the police and other law enforcement agents know that they have a particular facility, they have to be careful how they just put people who are not necessarily need to be both places. So they know that they need to use that place for the people who really needs to be locked up from the community.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Oju Agoma. We'll come back to you, but first let's take responses, tweets from our viewers who are tweeting at us at our Twitter handle at NTAGMN. Just remember that you can be a part of this conversation. This morning, we're live on the network service of Nigerian Television Authority. You can send in your tweets via our Twitter handle that's on your screen at NTAGMN. If you have suggestions, you have questions for our guests, just send us a tweet. But first, let's take your tweets, the tweets that have come in, so that we can have our guests respond to some of your questions or suggestions that you have made already. The first one is from Festus Akimboyo. It says, the new Nigeria correctional law should ensure that our prisoners are safe, respected, and have unhindered access to meaningful rehabilitative activities. The appalling living conditions and lack of access to meaningful rehabilitative activities in our prisons is unacceptable.
Chris Simeon has this tweet. Now, the name does not sound palatable in the ears of a layman. In those days, if someone committed a crime, they would say, you are going to prison. Now, if someone commits a crime, where is he going to? Is it correctional? All right. Now, federal and state governments should do their very best to improve the standard of the prisons. The necessary facilities should be put in place because there is a lot of decay in, according to him, Nigerian prisons.
All right, this one is from Law Alpha C. Law Alpha C says, the correctional service instead of the prison service is a mere change of name in view of the fact that virtually nothing has been done and may be done to improve the condition of inmates in recent time.
Now, Badamasi Haruna Adamo says it is one thing to make a law and another to make it practically possible by way of implementation. Our problem has always been embracing ethical revolution. And I hope that it will go beyond the change of name this time for the prisons and that their practices will be modern.
Steve Bond 007, that's at Dada Stevens, says it will be just a change of name, just like NEPA to PHCN to DISCOs, if reforms are not implemented. A person that's told yam shouldn't be in there with terrorists, but should undergo community service.
Yeah, you go to the farm, I'll be tilling the field and producing more yam, I believe. All right, now Abdul says name changing without corresponding change in its operations will amount to nothing. There must be aggressive reorientation in the management of our prison services, now correctional service. I suggest that the organization should be under the supervision of the Ministry of Justice.
Akeju Olagbaju says there is a need for correctional center policy and a change in the existing structure to reflect the change. A correctional policy guarantees minimum and prescribed standard of living in confinement. Here we're still battling with human rights for our free citizens.
Now, Otu Ekong says the issues are beyond the change in name. What is the state of the correctional facilities and what is the orientation of the staff of the service?
And this one is from Bola Obabs. He says the new minister has a Herculean task of correcting the ills that has bedeviled our prisons, now correctional centers. A situation where we have inmates packed like sardines in a dirty, stinking one-room apartment is sardonic. Prison is for correction and reformation, not hell.
Francis Obi. Now, most of the inmates have not been taken to court, and some investigations have not even been concluded. There should be quick dispensation of justice or amnesty for those that will merit such amnesty during this independence period. That's to say, the forthcoming 59th independence anniversary by the president and the governors. Quality training of officers is also important.
And Omogbola Ombab says, the prison is for correction, reformation. What we have today is that inmates come out to become more hardened because of their terrible experiences. Life should be made a lot easier. Good food, decongestion to allow habitable living, justice system review to give accelerated judgment.
S.O. Emmanuel, the first and most urgent thing is to decongest the prisons. Now, imagine 200 persons in one room. This isn't correctional, but tragic and pathetic.
All right, those are the tweets that we have now. We still expecting more of your tweets. You can join us in the conversation. Just tweet at us at our Twitter handle at NTAGMN. Let's bring in the controller of the Nigerian Correctional Service. You've listened to some of the tweets that have coming. We just talked about the justice system just before the tweets came in. That's one issue that is very particular. But then another issue is, from the messages that we've got now, is the living condition of inmates. I'd like you to speak to that.
While the Controller General is responding to the living conditions, which arises from overcrowding in some cases, we would like you to also address this issue, because it's part of the provision in the law. And it says, bringing awaiting trial persons to court. Because we have had reports in the past of a person or a defendant who is supposed to appear in court, and the prison warder or the prison services, as they used to be called at the time, would say, "Oh, we couldn't bring the person." The new law makes the provision for what the correctional services should do, but it appears that a leeway has also been created for the correctional services to, if you like, fail to produce a defendant in court, because if you say there are circumstances beyond your control, if you don't have vehicles, if you have a vehicle, you don't have fuel, if something is happening. So how do we deal with that? Because part of the cause of delay is because these persons who are awaiting trial don't get to appear in court when they are supposed to appear in court, in addition to the question my colleague asked.
Well, thank you very much. I am happy to say that since coming on board precisely on the 17th of May 2016, this administration under President Muhammadu Buhari has done a lot to the prison service and to what has now become the correctional service. We have had a quantum of infrastructural upgrade in most of our prisons. You have heard Professor Alemika say that we have built so many cells where there is a space. We have demolished and erected new, more habitable cells, and we are building new places in order to move out from the prisons that are already chopped up by urbanization. And this government has provided enough on that capital base, and we are doing that and we are attending to that. And I'm sure with the signing of this new act, it now reinforces the need for government to provide more of that capital outlay for us to be able to upgrade our infrastructure, because there is a need also for now to build completely new female prisons, because it's no longer the case to have a wing within the prison, and it is also the case to have more Basel institutions. So I think this government has demonstrated the commitment to see that there is a change in the prison service and is now the correctional service. This government has also been able to provide us with a quantum of vehicles. From 2016 to 2017 and 2018, we have purchased over 382 vehicles in order to provide for taking prisoners to and from the courts. And it is no longer the case that the prison has been a source of delay for access to justice, because we have been able now to carry prisoners to and from the courts as when due. And government has also been magnanimous enough to provide money for fueling and servicing of these vehicles in order to see, because hitherto we rely on a very bigger sum, and some of us have to rely on the state governments, the local governments, and the rest of them. But this is no longer the case in most of the custodial facilities across the country. Government has also been able to provide large amount of money for the purchase of drugs. So the healthcare of the well-being of the inmates has tremendously improved. This administration has also been able to provide enough for beds, beddings across the country. Despite the overcrowded nature of this, we have been able to provide that, and the health and the environment has changed, and the prisoners are looking very healthy. This government has also been able to pay the contractors as when due, those who supply ration to the prisoners. Hitherto it was a problem, but now it is no longer a problem. So overall, within the last 3 years, there was a demonstration of interest, a renewed interest by this administration to see that they position the Nigerian Prison Service for this act to come. That is the Nigerian Correctional Service Act. And I know that this administration will do more to ensure that we actually actualize what we need. We have already come out with a strategic implementation plan that we will present to government, we will present to the Minister of Interior, who will now present it to government to see how this can be done. But like Professor Alemika said, Nigerians should be very patient with the implementation of this law. It is not just a mere change of name, but the changes are fundamental. And they will see these changes very, very soon.
All right, we'll take a short break now, and when we come back, of course, we have our correspondents. We'll be joining our correspondents at the appeal court in Abuja for a situation report on what's happening there right now. Of course, you remember today is Wednesday, and of course, the judgment to be delivered at the Presidential Election Tribunal later today. So we'll join our correspondents probably when we come back from the break, and of course, continue our discussion. So stay with us.
It is here again. The NTA ETV Annual Expo is here again. This time, it is the 13th edition. 2019 has as its theme, promoting unity and innovations in youths as agents of change through science and arts. It promises to be captivating as youths across the nation showcase their unique skills and innovations in science and arts, make new friends, and showcase their rich cultural heritage. Join us at the NTA Headquarters Arena, Area 11, Garki, Abuja, from Sunday, 28th October to Thursday, 24th October, 2019. For more information, participation, and sponsorship, please call these numbers. NTA ETV, promoting learning.
To the outer framers, the hat tippers, the fringe goers, you don't need to hide anymore. Try Dettol Even Tone. It cleans and helps to reduce the appearance of blemishes caused by oil, dirt, and germs, giving your skin a healthy feel for an even better you.
Introducing the new Dettol Even Tone Pink Glow. Healthy skin feel for an even better you.
You're welcome back, and it's still good morning, Nigeria. We still have with us the Controller General of the Nigerian Correctional Service with us here. We're discussing the Correctional Service beyond the name change. We still have our guest, Professor Alemika, who is also in Jos, and then Port Harcourt we have Dr. Uju Agomo. But first, let me ask the CG here. You talked about certificate issuance that is being provided for by the current law. Speak to us more on that. Is it diploma, SSCE? What kind of certificate? Would it be honored for employment? Is it certificate of jail?
In the former law, there was nothing about issuance of certificate to any prisoner that has been discharged from prison.
Okay, so the certificate you're talking, just a second, you're talking about is certificate
of good conduct.
Of good conduct after your prison's
expiration.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, not an academic.
Not an academic. We pursue academic programs within the Nigerian Correctional Service. I know it will perhaps come to that. There are so many reformation programs, though the former law did not say that, but the creation of the Controller Generals, through circulars, they have been able to come up with so many reformation programs for skill acquisition and educational pursuit. Okay. And that we have carried out. But this certificate that we're talking now is of good conduct. Mark you that there are so many people that have come out from the prisons do not have certificate, and therefore they are stigmatized by their relations, by their family, and by the larger society. And with this certificate now, it is an offense once it is issued by the board. Once there's a recommendation from the Controller General to the board and the certificate is issued to a prisoner, you cannot stigmatize him on the basis of his stay in prison. If you do, you can take legal action.
You cannot stigmatize. You cannot what? Segregate the individual.
You cannot, yes. You cannot discriminate against him on the basis of his custodial stay.
Okay, depending on the nature of his offense. Because, you know, there are some circumstances where a person will be required to fill a form and then you are asked to say, look, have you ever been under imprisonment, you know, state the nature of the offense.
Yeah.
If it's a misdemeanor, I mean, fine. But if it's a serious offense, I mean, a higher category of felony.
I will not give interpretation. It is the court that will give that interpretation. It will the court that will give that interpretation. But the law says once it is issued, once the certificate is issued to the prisoner, you cannot discriminate on him on the basis of his custodial stay. Right. That's what the law says.
Okay, well, thank you very much, CJ. We understand that our correspondents, as my colleague indicated, are the Court of Appeal premises in Abuja, but we understand we can't go over to them almost immediately. If we have a clear sense of what's playing out from our engineering crew, we might get to say that. Okay, we can return to our guests on Good Morning Nigeria, still on the conversation of the name change of Nigerian Prison Service to Nigerian Correctional Service. Over to Dr. Uju Agbomo. Dr. Uju Agbomo, there's something I would like us to also deal with in the course of this conversation. But don't, of course, be surprised if we'll get across to our correspondent and then we have to cut away from you. But first, let's look at the economics of incarceration. Just yesterday, one of our regular guests on Good Morning Nigeria, Professor Nazifi Dama, he was speaking at a seminar outside of our studios, and he made a point which I thought was very significant. He says, look, when you have offenders who have been convicted and sent to prison, they tend to create a dependency syndrome, in the sense that they depend on the state for their welfare while they are in their prison, while they are serving their prison terms. And that they appear also, while in prison, not to be economic agents. Is it possible, as part of the implementation of the new act, to ensure that such persons become economic agents even while they are in prison? I mean, we talk about agriculture, we talk about road construction, all kinds of things that these persons can be made rather than just sitting in prison. And of course, a person is already limited in his or her movement, but the person is dependent on the state. As Nigerians would say, the person is government pikin. So how do you convert that government pikin, into an economic agent even while in prison?
Is very correct. It's to say not only those who have been convicted. That is the situation for everyone who is in custodial facility, which is why we're encouraging more of utilization of non-custodial measures. How do you convert that person into one that can contribute? One is that if you look at some of the provisions of the new law, there is a stage where it talks about issue of enterprises. And now, this moment, once there are enterprises that are created by the correctional services, the funds coming out there will be divided into three. One, to be kept for the person towards their rehabilitation and or resettlement. The second, to be used to sustain the enterprise. The third, to be sent to the Federated Revenue Fund. Before this time, every fund has always gone to the third category. So you can now see by the first category, it's also something that can begin to create more funds. Don't also forget that with the provision of the non-custodial measure, community service, for example, is a person working out in the community. For those who the courts will grant that particular sanction, instead of the government feeding this person. So the person is also out there in the community contributing. But I quickly want to add two things to the earlier point that have been made. Please, in relation to the production of persons to court by the custodial service, Section 17 of this new law clearly states that now you must show a proof of service. Because sometimes people say they have served production warrant to the correctional service or now then prisons, but the person they did not produce the person in court. But meanwhile, the officers will say they never saw anything. Now, it is not just serving, you must show the court a proof of service. The point about the conditions when these people can say they are not able to produce is only when it is outside their control. the force majeure, just like say the acts of God, sometimes there are things that are outside their control. So it's important to understand that that is exactly what that particular provision actually speaks to. Also, the point about issuance of certificate of good behavior, it is also an incentive to encourage more of the inmates to do well. So it's not something that they are going to give to everybody, but it's something that will apply to those who have worked well, who can now, the service can say, okay, they have changed from bad behavior to good behavior. But please, my final point on this is to say, when you keep somebody in custodial facility, it's not just the person. You are creating problem for their dependents. If the person was at work, you've taken the person out. And so many things. So that's why we're saying custodial sentencing should be as a last resort. It should be as a last resort. It's better for the country that way.
The CG of Nigerian Correctional Service. Of course, I'd like you to respond to the issues that she has raised as to, how they can be economically, empowered when they are still in prison. Just as Kingsley said, they don't become a liability, for everyone around them and, of course, for government.
You see, it's very important. That's why the Nigerian Correctional Service does not want the high number of awaiting trials, because these are persons that the law still presumes they are innocent until they are proven. And we just keep them 24/7 without anything. However, the convicted inmates are properly utilized in workshops and in other educational pursuits. But in terms of, so that whatever they have been able to produce, the law now reinforces that we must establish standard workshops. And so what does this mean? This means that once the standard workshops are established in the various custodial centers, we can reach out in order to get work, contracts, and do the work, finish, and then one part out of three, one part of whatever is the proceeds will be for that workshop to upgrade it, 2 for government revenue, 3 for the prisoners that have participated in that work, so that they all have protection, and on discharge they have something to settle back to the society without government intervention.
Like an exit package.
Yes.
And I was wondering, Kingsley, just as we're saying, Ella, what has happened to, in those days, I remember, all right, let's see if we can actually join our correspondents who are at the give us a situation report ahead of the judgment by the Presidential Election Petition Court. We have, of course, Vera Chinwuba there and Dele Atumbu. All right, Vera, what's the situation?
Kingsley and Rhoda, we're reaching you live from Court of Appeal, Abuja. The 5-man panel of Presidential Election Court is set to give its final verdict on the petition filed by Alhaji Atiku Abubakar and PDP challenging the February 23rd election in which President Buhari was declared winner. The petitioners have raised quite a number of issues, which are that INEC transmitted election results through a central server, and that APC, INEC, and some security operatives are the point of collation connived to manipulate the election result. And also that President Buhari, at the time of election, did not possess the required requisite qualification. All this, the respondents have countered in their various submissions. They have also described the petition as a sham and lacking in merit. These are the issues for determination before the court this morning. I have my colleague here, Dele Atumbi, who will take a look at the security situation here. Dele, over to you.
Thank you, Vera. The truth of the matter is that unlike what we used to have, the security arrangement here is very tight. Because before now, we don't normally have these security people around. But now the security arrangement is very tight, and we have some people who are here. And the truth of the matter is that the Presidential Election Petition Court commenced sitting on the 8th of May 2019, and it was headed as at that time by the President of the Court of Appeal, Justice Zainab Bukashua. And taking a look at that level, the PDP objected to our continued sitting or presiding over the petition, and Justice Bukashua recused himself on 22nd of May 2019, which brought in the present Justice Mohamed Gaba to preside over the 5-man panel. So we'll continue to keep you abreast of what is happening here as the court is set for the judgment. I don't know whether Rhoda...
we update you further when the court starts sitting. Thank you. I'm back to the studio.
All right, thank you very much there, Vera Chinwumba and Dele Atumbi, our correspondents who are at the Court of Appeal premises, which, of course, is hosting the Presidential Election Petition Tribunal. Under our laws, in specific terms, that's to say the provision of the Constitution, it is the justices of the Court of Appeal, 5 of them, who will serve as a tribunal of first instance to hear a presidential election petition. And thereafter, in the event of any appeal, the appeal, of course, will go to the Supreme Court, whose decision is final on such matters. Usually, courts begin sitting at 9 o'clock in the morning, so expectedly, we will hope to get more from our correspondents when the tribunal begins sitting at 9, in this case, to deliver its judgment. So today is D-Day, as it were, decision day, for the Election Petition Tribunal sitting at the Court of Appeal premises in Nigeria's Federal Capital Territory. Once again, appreciation to our correspondents. Now, let's go over to Jos and then bring in Professor Etanibi Alemika. Professor Etanibi Alemika, we're, of course, discussing the correctional services away from that cutaway we had a while ago with regard to the election petition. Prof, this is a matter that we've also had cause to get you to contribute to on Good Morning Nigeria. Look, this new act of Nigeria Correctional Service has come, in a sense, some persons would argue, to, again, challenge, if you like, the federal nature of our system. Now, you have the prisons under the exclusive legislative list. In the meantime, the various entities that can send in inmates into the correctional centers, whether as custodial or non-custodial purposes, are all the 3 tiers of government. And then you have seen new cost centers arising from what will become necessary on account of the implementation of the new act, building new female wings, having parole, and the entire gamut of it is costly. But because it is a matter for the exclusive list, it's the business of the federal government. Going forward, you had given what obviously is a realistic time frame for us to witness rapid change under the correctional service system. But what, in your opinion, is likely to be the contribution or should be the contribution of a subnational in the efficacy of the new act? Or might it at some point require the shift of the prisons from the exclusive list to the concurrent?
Well, the law, as it is today, as you said, is under the exclusive list. But there is nothing preventing, and that's what I would want to see, the Ministry of Social Welfare in the respective states playing very critical role in the context of non-custodial services. I think that is what we need to be thinking very seriously, because the services cannot be fully domiciled within the National Correctional Service, that means the Nigeria Correctional Services. We must be thinking about expanding the role and the capability of the Ministry of Social Welfare creating, if you like, correctional service department in that ministry that will link up with the correctional services, non-custodial services within the prison, such that they can then contribute to the non-custodial services in supervision, in reintegration, in rehabilitation. I think that is an area which is important. Whether that will require a constitutional amendment will be a debate, but I don't think it necessarily requires that. As you mentioned, probably about 80% or more of the people in the prison are actually violators of state laws, not federal laws. And yet they are kept in prison on behalf of the state by the federal government. And it is interesting in all the debate about state police, nobody is talking about state prisons. And I think if there is going to be devolution in such a way that we have state police, of course the corollary of state prison will be very important. Why we must also be very careful is all the influentials like Administration of Criminal Justice Committee in many states, they don't function well. And I've had cause in the past to do some investigation, some research, and the argument is under the chairmanship of the chief judge, who will say, in fact, when he brings these people together, he needs to give them tea and he cannot even afford it. So there is need to build the capacity of the state agencies, because many of the people referred to earlier in the law and emphasized by Dr. Agomo are state officials. They are not federal officers. So the state needs to be, in a way, energized and mobilized to take this matter seriously and not just a federal issue. I also want to comment about the issue about industries. Again, until about 3 decades ago, when we had this terrible congestion of awaiting trial, the prison industry was actually a little bit robust. I think it's been overwhelmed by the awaiting trial, led to closure of shops and a number of facilities. There are many ways you can run prison enterprises. Of course, there are constraints in running it. I recall as far back as probably 1987, there was a workshop on prison industry. I recall Baba Kodong was then in charge of I think inmate services or something that was called at the headquarters then. And a blueprint was actually made. As the Controller General said, if you can bring in private sector, for example, to even establish the industry, the components in the machines or whatever is needed to produce. And they can also become part of the profit sharing, because what is being shared is actually the profit that is being shared by the 3 tiers. So you can bring in companies to provide the machines or the tools or the materials for producing within the prison, create the industry. We need to be very creative in the way that we manage the law in that case. I know in other countries it's been, there are challenges. In the US, for example, which has over 100 years of debate over prison industry, what they've done is what they call state use. Because the union will say, when you produce in the prison, you are likely to be selling the product much cheaper than it is outside, and there is a fear of exploitation of the labor of the industry. What is done of the state use, for example, is can the uniform of all the security agencies be sewn in the prison by prison tailors? Because that is for state use. That means it's going to be used by the government itself. It's not part of the external general market. So there is a lot that can be done in the prison industry, whether it's prison farms and the rest of it. And the Act gave quite a lot of substantial attention to that area. So they can actually become economic agents while there. But as long as you have the awaiting trial, large as they are, the prison will be disoriented. The new custodial correctional service will continue to be disoriented. How you get these people out, as I argued earlier, is to deal with the process of inflow. And that is at the earlier stages. Police need to be resourced. They need to be reoriented. Their capability need to be developed. Reorientation in the sense that you need to carry out investigation before arrest. Because what happens, is some people report cases to police, maybe case of burglary. When they report to the police, they make it look like armed robbery. Then a person is charged under armed robbery, which makes it difficult for him to get bail. So these are the complexity of the congestion in the prison, and it is not something that you can just sweep with one policy as it goes on. The final point I want to emphasize in the whole process of the law, the correctional services and the custodial services is, if you look at the law, it recognizes that the core function of the prison is still custody. So we must not get away, because Kingsley was asking whether they will change the name. So that's why the centers will be called custodial centers, because the first thing is the prison takes, the correctional service take custody of the individual. What do you do with that individual that you have taken custody of? You need to treat him or her in a humane manner. You need to provide services that make the person retain his or her dignity. You need, if he's been convicted, you need to provide such people with opportunity to develop or retain the skill he or she has acquired before coming to prison. So it's a lot of work that needs to be done. And my encouragement is, let us have a need assessment. What will it really require? The budget must be realistic, and over how many years, what stages need to be brought in year by year in order to accomplish this. But the point you make, there must be a collaboration. Ministry of Social Welfare, you go into, it's not everybody. That's why I say you